Welcome to Raptorisms over Crystalis episode 5. Where we last left off, I had just gotten the tornado bracelet, and with that I can now take this to Tornell and he's going to teach me a new spell. Now last time around I'd found Tornell, but because I didn't have the tornado bracelet he wouldn't teach me the new spell, but this time around he should be teaching me the new spell of teleport, and with that I should be able to enter Mount Sabre through the north. After getting through the north entrance to Mount Sabre, I'm going to go through another kind of long maze, after which we're going to get up to a boss, but this time around I do need to level up to level 7 before taking on that boss, so I'm not going to get to that in this video. Instead, we're just going to work our way through a lot of mazes, and while we do that, let's talk about politics, everyone's favorite subjects. There's some big news coming out of Washington just today. The Electoral College, which is the body responsible for choosing the President of the United States directly, has certified Joe Biden as the new President of the United States and Kamala Harris as the new Vice President. In other words, Donald Trump has officially and finally lost. So I want to take a look at two different things. First of all, why did he lose in the vote tallies? And second of all, why did he lose in his legal challenges to those vote tallies? Now remember, I am a real lawyer, TM, so my analysis should be better than most. However, a lot of lawyers have really screwed up in their analysis of this case, so take that with a grain of salt. So first of all, why do I think Donald Trump didn't get enough votes to win the election? And let's put aside the allegations of cheating and conspiracy theories and things like that. Well, first of all, Donald Trump was never really that popular in the first place. Let's remember back in 2016, he barely won against Hillary Clinton, and the only reason that was the case was because Hillary Clinton was also, just like Donald Trump, an extremely polarizing candidate. This time around, his opponent was Joe Biden, who's just your generic sort of placeholder Democratic candidate who no one really seemed to like or hate all that much. He's not someone who could energize the Democratic base the same way Barack Obama could, but at least he could attract the moderate voter, and that's really all you need to win an election. The second reason Donald Trump lost the election is because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic. Now, in my opinion, it's not really fair to blame him for this, but the fact of the matter is, he is the President of the United States, and if a lot of Americans die on his watch, he does have to accept some blame. Assuming the coronavirus pandemic never happened, and the economy was still in the same shape it was before the pandemic, I think Donald Trump would have won. And the third reason why I think Donald Trump lost is because he was overconfident about how he'd perform in his debates against Joe Biden. There's a funny phenomenon in US politics in which people tend to like the idea of a candidate more than they actually like the candidate him or herself, and so when that candidate is exposed on the debate stage, their would-be supporters suddenly have second thoughts. And I just leveled up to level 6. I'm on a pretty good pace here, I just need to get up one more level before I can take on the next boss. Anyway, the common assumption before the debates was that Donald Trump was the much better public speaker and that Joe Biden was just old and slow. Donald Trump should have, in theory, mopped the floor with Joe Biden, but that didn't happen. In the first debate, Donald Trump interrupted Joe Biden like crazy, and to be fair, Joe Biden did interrupt Donald Trump back, but they both came off looking really unlikable. It was effectively a double KO, but Donald Trump couldn't take a tie. He needed that win because he was behind in the polls. Then before the second debate, Donald Trump caught the coronavirus himself, so that debate had to be cancelled. This effectively resulted in another draw, and Donald Trump couldn't afford that because he was still behind in the national polls. And now I'm finally caught up to Tornell. He's surprised that I made it for some reason, even though I was literally just here in the previous video, and now he's teaching me the spell of teleport. With this, I can travel to any village that I've already been to for 20 magic points, in much the same way that I could with the warp boots. I really don't want to walk through that whole maze again, so let me try out teleport right now. Here we are, and I can choose between 3 towns I've been to so far. Let me head back to Bryan Mayer for now. Okay, and from here I'll try to enter Mount Sabre through the north. But first let me stop by the inn because it's only going to be $20 here, and as always, let's waste some magic points here. Raptor, I pray for your safety. Ooh, here's an actual useful hint. The flame bracelet will maximize the Sword of Fire's power. Find it. Thanks for an actual useful hint this time. And there's no point in talking to the 2 people I haven't met yet, so let's just hit up the inn for now. Anyway, so back to the election. The second debate was cancelled, and Donald Trump was given the opportunity to at least have some sort of online debate to make up for it, but Donald Trump said no, and in retrospect this was a terrible idea because he needed every chance he could to make up for that gap in the polls, but he thought that he would only have the decisive advantage if he could debate against Joe Biden live, and I think this was a huge mistake. Basically, this meant that Donald Trump had to have a stellar debate the third time around in order to make up serious ground against Joe Biden, and I don't think he came anywhere close to that. I think he slightly outperformed Joe Biden for sure, but he didn't win decisively. And this meant that Joe Biden could ride his lead into Election Day. Now, many people criticized Joe Biden for this, saying that he seemed like he was too old and that maybe he was resting the whole time while Donald Trump was full of energy, traveling around to campaign. But Donald Trump, quite frankly, he had to, and Joe Biden didn't. So those are the reasons why I think Joe Biden won and Donald Trump lost. Now let's get into Mount Sabre through the north here, and then I'll talk about the legal challenges to the election. Okay, so we go up this passageway here, and last time I couldn't hurt any of these giant blobs, but this time around I can kill them basically in one shot from the ball of fire. Kind of efficient, but they're not really that valuable in terms of experience points or money, so I'm going to keep leveling up in Mount Sabre itself. Let me just kill a few of these guys for fun, because it is kind of refreshing to be able to kill a guy you couldn't kill before, but once again, it doesn't help me all that much. So last time I couldn't enter through the north, but this time I can move straight through. So we're going to walk up here and we're going to get over to the next sort of town. It's not really a town exactly, but it's the next place I'll be able to teleport to, and that is Nadare's Inn. Nadare is the Japanese word for avalanche, which is fitting for a mountain location, and let's talk here. So the trail is blocked off by some strange people. Of course, that means there are some enemies ahead. Food here is great, I'm sure it is, but there's no eating in this game, and this guy is Nadare himself, the guy who runs the inn. Back here, we just have some random people. A guy from Brinemare, the guy we saw from a pub back in the second episode, he came up here, and we're gonna find him soon enough. The old man here is just talking about how he used to be so good at climbing mountains when he was a kid, and the next two rooms, I believe, okay, so these are both shops. I don't need to buy any items right now, so let me get out of here for now, and the next place is actually the inn, but it is expensive, $50. So if possible, I don't want to come back here, but I'll probably have to at least once, because I do need to level up to level 7, and I'll probably take a few hits along the way. Now let's get out of the inn and see what happened to the guy who came here from the town of Brinemare to try to get rich quick. He's saying, "It's you. I had a dream I could strike it rich, but alas, I failed. I was captured by some strange people. They put me in a cave. I also saw people from Leaf. They were all being forced to work, but I escaped and they found me. I can't move. Hold on, hold on. Oh, to have tasted Nadare's food again. Ugh." And he's already dead. Now, if you take a look back at that conversation one more time, you'll see that this is one of the few times in the whole game that the protagonist actually has a line. So let's keep walking down here and find out exactly who killed him. So we're about to get to this little gate at the entrance here, and just for good measure, I'm going to put on the Sword of Wind. I hear someone talking. Get a little closer, and there are two soldiers right there. Are those worthless villagers working well? Well, they're used to the cold weather, and I haven't heard complaints. But of course, it's difficult to complain when you're not allowed. Long live the Dragonia Empire. So these guys are the ones who enslaved the people from the village of Leaf, and let me go kill them with the newfound tornado bracelet. As you can see, it shoots a whole bunch of little tornadoes, and it kills these guys pretty easily. The downside, however, is that you'll notice that my magic points are dropping every single time I use this, unlike with the regular sword or the ball. So as soon as I finish using it, I'm just going to de-equip it and probably not use it again until I get to the boss. Alright, so let me head inside this cave here and get back to the election talk. Election night in the US tends to be pretty fun for me over here in Japan because I can stay up throughout the whole ballot counting process because night in the US is daytime in Japan. I watched the whole thing as it unfolded, and Donald Trump was leading throughout the in-person vote, but afterwards, when they started counting the mail-in ballots, Joe Biden took the lead in several key states. Now this was kind of predictable because Joe Biden was pushing mail-in voting while Donald Trump was urging his voters to actually go to the polls in person. Because of this, many media outlets actually said that if Donald Trump declared victory on election night, they wouldn't respect that, but if Joe Biden did, they would. This may sound horribly biased, but when you consider the expected voting patterns and also what actually ended up happening with the mail-in ballot count, it does kind of make sense. So what ends up happening is that Donald Trump declares victory before all the mail-in ballots are counted, Joe Biden declares victory after all the mail-in ballots are counted, and Donald Trump and his supporters start alleging that mail-in ballots shouldn't count. This leads to a whole bunch of election lawsuits, and I would split them into roughly two categories. The first kind of lawsuits allege fraud, and the second kind of lawsuits allege unconstitutional voting procedures. Lawsuits based on fraud need to be based on actual proof of fraud, not just potential for it. Make no mistake about it, there are definitely vulnerabilities in mail-in balloting, but was there enough proof that these vulnerabilities were actually exploited? I certainly didn't see enough. And part of this is because even if there is fraud, it really is hard to gather information and evidence about it. We have a secret ballot system, a lot of this is done on electronic voting machines, many places don't have voter ID laws. Don't get me wrong, there are definitely a lot of vulnerabilities in the system, and mail-in balloting on top of that just makes everything more complicated. I think more safeguards definitely do need to be put in place to ensure the integrity integrity of our elections. And the statement by the Department of Homeland Security that this was supposedly the safest election in US history is absolute nonsense. But what concrete evidence of widespread voter fraud do you actually have? Trump's legal team and his supporters talked really big about it, but at the end of the day, they didn't come anywhere close to producing the level of evidence that they needed in order to succeed in some kind of fraud lawsuit. That whole promise of releasing the Kraken was a total embarrassment. So the fraud lawsuits, even if there was fraud in actuality, were gonna go nowhere because there just wasn't enough evidence to back them up. The more interesting lawsuits, in my opinion, were the ones based on constitutional voting procedure. These, I think, had legs to at least go somewhere if the judges were willing to take these cases up. Well, except one. There was Donald Trump's lawsuit about Election Day having to be all in one day, and therefore all votes had to be counted by Election Day or they wouldn't count. I think that lawsuit was absolute garbage and deserved to be thrown out. Absentee balloting, for example, has been going on for a very long time, and there was no way they were just going to throw that out. In other legal contexts as well, it's the mailing date, not the date of receipt, that counts for all kinds of things. So once again, there's a lot of legal basis for saying you can count votes after Election Day so long as the actual voting took place on or before Election Day. But now let's take a look at some of these state constitutional challenges, saying that in those states, mail-in balloting is specifically prescribed by the state constitution, and any expansion of mail-in voting ballots without a constitutional amendment would not be lawful. There's also a similar kind of argument that the federal constitution requires state legislatures to make the calls about how voting procedure is done in that state, and therefore any voting procedures not directly approved by those state legislatures should not count. I think that these kinds of cases actually had a lot of merit to them, and if there was any one kind of case that would overturn the election, this would be it. The problem in the actual practice of law, however, is that you don't just consider whether someone violated the law, you also have to consider whether there's an appropriate remedy that can be granted by the courts. So what's the appropriate remedy here? Is it really appropriate to effectively overturn a US presidential election just because a state legislature passed a law about mail-in balloting but didn't actually make that a constitutional amendment? Most judges are simply not willing to go that far. And so both state and federal judges at almost all levels decided to get rid of these cases almost as quickly as they could. The Supreme Court of the United States, which is considered to be 6-3 conservative, and 3 of those justices were actually appointed by Donald Trump himself, they did everything they could not to even hear these cases, which in almost all cases is entirely their call, except perhaps in the cases of state versus state lawsuits. And even in the state versus state lawsuit, I believe it was Texas versus Pennsylvania, the Supreme Court said that one state does not have standing to sue another state over their internal voting procedures. And I would agree, but if you're going to reject that kind of case, then on the other hand, you really should take a look at the cases that originated within the same state, but the Supreme Court refused to hear those as well. Basically, it seems like the Supreme Court didn't want to hear any of these cases because they didn't want to be accused of deciding the election. So now let's move on to the state Supreme Courts, and I think the state Supreme Courts did something really disingenuous here in applying the doctrine of latches. Basically, this means that they brought the lawsuit too late, and if they really cared, they should have brought it earlier. The thing is, there were actually some cases that were brought earlier, and the judges said that those cases were actually brought too early. You can't sue over hypothetical or potential harm, you have to wait until you're actually harmed in order to file a lawsuit, at least in most cases. So you can't file too early, you can't file too late, and there doesn't appear to be any sort of Goldilocks period when it's just right to file. So if there's an unconstitutional voting procedure, when can you actually file a lawsuit about it? It's really unclear, and that's a big problem going forward. In any case, that's basically how the judges acted in every state, and Trump lost across the board. It was also a numbers problem from the very beginning. Trump would have needed to overturn the results in at least 4 states to have a chance. I could see it maybe happening in 1 or 2 states, but 4 or more? No way. After all the lawsuits failed, there were some weird theories about all kinds of procedural ways you could possibly overturn the election. For example, you could get the vice president not to read off a state's desired list of electors, but a different list instead. But that was obviously never going to happen. So the Electoral College finally convened, and after a few little hiccups here and there, they finally chose Joe Biden to be the next president of the United States. Now, I don't really care for Joe Biden, but that's reality. So that's all for now. I'm still grinding my way through Mount Sabre North, and when we get back here, I'm going to grind up to level 7 and then take on the next boss. See you later.